These cities are the cathedrals of the modern world, monuments to what human ambition and concentrated capital can construct. And they are extraordinary. The architecture is extraordinary. The infrastructure is extraordinary. The density of wealth, of talent, of power gathered in these small geographic spaces is genuinely unlike anything else on Earth. But there is something else in these cities. Something that the skyline is very carefully designed to prevent you from seeing. Something that exists not in spite of the luxury, but in many ways because of it. And that is what we are here to find. Welcome back to Veiled Meridian. Every episode, we go beneath the surface of a place the world has agreed to admire, and we look at what that surface is covering. Today, we are not going to one city. We are going to all of them. Or rather, we are going to the version of them that exists just outside the frame of every photograph, just around the corner from every luxury hotel lobby, just below the threshold of what the cities themselves want you to notice. Singapore, the invisible underclass of the perfect city. Singapore is the city that urban planners around the world study as a model. Clean, efficient, safe, astonishingly well-governed by any comparative standard. Its public transit system is a global benchmark. Its streets are immaculate. Its GDP per capita is among the highest on Earth. It has solved problems of housing, sanitation, public order, and economic development that cities 10 times its size have failed to address in a century of trying. Singapore looks, to most of the world, like proof that it is possible to build a city that actually works. But Singapore's perfection is maintained, in significant part, by a workforce that lives almost entirely outside the frame of the city's carefully constructed image. There are approximately 250,000 foreign domestic workers in Singapore, overwhelmingly women from the Philippines, Indonesia, and Myanmar, who live in the homes of their employers, working as maids, nannies, and caregivers. They are legally excluded from the standard employment protections that apply to other workers in Singapore. They are entitled to one rest day per week, which their employers can legally require them to compensate for with additional pay if they wish to take it. They have no statutory right to a minimum wage. Their accommodation is whatever space their employer chooses to provide, which in documented cases has meant storage rooms, converted spaces barely large enough for a mattress, and kitchens. Then there are the construction workers again. Overwhelmingly South Asian migrants who built Singapore's gleaming infrastructure and who continue to build the new developments that keep the skyline evolving. They live in dedicated dormitories on the city's periphery, in conditions that became globally visible during the COVID-19 pandemic when massive outbreaks in these dormitories exposed the density and the inadequacy of the accommodations to international scrutiny for the first time. The Singaporean government's response was swift, and the conditions have been addressed in various ways since then. But the outbreak revealed, to an audience that had not been paying attention, that the machinery of the perfect city runs on a workforce living in conditions that the city's image had never suggested existed. Singapore is not a cruel city. Its governance is, by most measures, genuinely competent and genuinely concerned with social outcomes. But the gap between the city it presents to the world and the conditions of the workers who make that presentation possible is real, documented, and worth understanding because it is a gap that exists in various forms in every luxury city on this list. New York. Homeless in the capital of the world, New York City calls itself the capital of the world. And there is a case to be made. Nowhere else on Earth concentrates this much financial power, cultural production, media influence, and human ambition in such a small geographic space. The New York Stock Exchange moves markets on every continent. The Fashion Week sets trends that appear in shops in countries that have never seen a Manhattan skyline. The art that sells at Christie's and Sotheby's auctions in New York sets the cultural agenda for the planet. New York is, genuinely, a city of staggering, almost incomprehensible wealth and power. New York City also has the largest homeless population of any city in the developed world. On any given night, over 60,000 people sleep in the city's shelter system, and that number represents only those who access the shelters. The true number of people without stable housing in New York, when you include those sleeping on the subway, in parks, in doorways, in cars, and in informal arrangements that don't show up in official counts, is substantially higher. The subway system, the same subway that carries bankers to Wall Street and tourists to Times Square and artists to their studios in Brooklyn, is simultaneously the largest shelter for homeless people in the city, a place where thousands of people sleep every night because there is nowhere else to go. The cruelty of New York's housing crisis is that it is not caused by scarcity of resources. It is caused by the concentration of those resources. The same forces that make New York the financial capital of the world, the concentration of wealth, the global demand for real estate, the transformation of housing from a place where people live into an asset class that investors trade, have made the cost of housing in New York so high that working people with jobs, sometimes multiple jobs, cannot afford to live in the city their labor helps maintain. A teacher, a nurse, a subway driver, a sanitation worker. People performing essential functions that the city absolutely cannot operate without. Many of them cannot afford to rent an apartment in the city they serve and must commute from hours away or live in conditions of extreme overcrowding that the city's image of wealth and dynamism gives absolutely no hint of. This is not a new problem. It is a decades-old structural consequence of a set of political and economic choices that prioritize the interests of capital over the interests of the people capital depends upon. And every morning, when the sun rises over the Manhattan skyline and the photographs are taken, and the city is presented to the world as the ultimate symbol of human achievement and ambition, 60,000 people wake up in shelters, and thousands more wake up on subway trains, in a city that has enough wealth to house every single one of them and has chosen, through its political structures, not to. Monaco and London. Poverty in the shadow of extraordinary wealth. Monaco is the wealthiest country in the world by GDP per capita. It is also, at just 2 square kilometers, the second smallest country in the world. It has no income tax. It has the highest concentration of millionaires and billionaires per capita of any place on Earth. Its harbor, during the Grand Prix, is lined with superyachts so large that they have helipads and swimming pools and staff-to-guest ratios that would embarrass a 5-star hotel. Monaco's wealth at its most concentrated, most visible, and most unashamed. But Monaco functions because of people who cannot afford to live in Monaco. The workers who staff the hotels and casinos and restaurants and private residences of Monaco's wealthy residents commute from the surrounding areas of France and Italy, from towns like Menton and Beausoleil and Ventimiglia, where the housing is affordable precisely because it is outside the Golden Circle. These workers cross the border every morning and return every evening, invisible to the image of Monaco that the world consumes. They clean the rooms, prepare the food, park the cars, tend the gardens, and perform every function that makes the extraordinary concentration of luxury in those 2 square kilometers possible, and they do it while being priced out of the place their labor sustains by orders of magnitude. London tells a version of the same story at far greater scale. London is one of the most expensive cities in the world, and one of the most unequal. The wealth is staggering. The City of London financial district generates revenues that dwarf the economies of entire countries, and the luxury real estate market in neighborhoods like Mayfair and Knightsbridge and Chelsea attracts buyers from every corner of the globe. But London also has over 300,000 people on housing waiting lists. It has food banks, charitable organizations that distribute free food to people who cannot afford to eat, operating in the shadows of Michelin-starred restaurants in some of the same postcodes. It has children growing up in temporary accommodation, in bed and breakfast hotels paid for by local councils, in conditions that the word poverty does not adequately capture but that exist every day, a short tube journey from the gleaming towers of Canary Wharf. The paradox of London, of Monaco, of every luxury city, is that the wealth does not trickle outward into the lives of the people at the bottom of the economic structure. It flows upward, and it flows inward into real estate, into assets, into offshore accounts, while the cost of living that the wealth inflates makes the lives of those at the bottom progressively harder. The city gets richer, the poor get poorer, and the skyline gets taller, blocking the view of what is happening at street level. Dubai. The workers who build the dream. Dubai is perhaps the most dramatic example on Earth of a city that has constructed an image so total, so globally dominant, so aggressively marketed that the reality behind it has been almost completely eclipsed. The Burj Khalifa, the Palm Jumeirah, the indoor ski slope inside the shopping mall, the hotels with underwater suites and gold leaf everything, and butlers on call around the clock. Dubai has spent decades and billions of dollars building not just a city, but a brand. And the brand is excess, luxury, and the absolute triumph of money over limitation. And then there are the workers. Approximately 90% of Dubai's population are foreign nationals. The overwhelming majority of them are migrant laborers from South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, who came to Dubai on contracts that promised wages and conditions that the reality of their employment frequently failed to deliver. These are the people who build the Burj Khalifa floor by floor, in temperatures that regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius, who constructed the Palm Jumeirah from the sea, who are building right now, as you watch this, the next tower and the next hotel and the next monument to luxury that will appear in the next set of Instagram photographs. They live in labor camps on the outer edges of the city dormitory accommodations, housing sometimes a dozen men to a single room, located far from the gleaming center, connected to it by buses that run before dawn and return after dark. Their passports, in documented cases that human rights organizations have reported on for decades, are held by employers, a practice called kafala, the sponsorship system, which ties a worker's legal right to remain in the country entirely to their employer's approval, creating a power imbalance so extreme that workers who attempt to leave abusive employment situations risk deportation. Wages are sometimes withheld for months. Access to legal recourse is limited by language barriers, by the cost of legal representation, and by a legitimate fear of the consequences of making a complaint in a system where your right to stay in the country belongs to the person you are complaining about. This is the labor force that built and maintains one of the most photographed cities on the planet. The next time you see a photograph of the Dubai skyline, and you will see one because they are everywhere, it is worth pausing to understand whose hands built what you are looking at, and what those hands were paid for the work. The architecture of invisibility. There is something that all of these cities have in common, beyond their wealth and beyond their poverty. They have all, to varying degrees and through varying means, developed what we might call an architecture of invisibility, a set of physical, social, and political structures specifically designed to ensure that the poverty which makes the luxury possible remains out of sight. This architecture is rarely the result of a single decision made by a single person. It accumulates over decades, through thousands of small decisions about zoning and transit and housing policy and policing and urban design, each of which individually seems technical and neutral, and which together add up to a system for keeping certain people and certain realities comprehensively invisible. The labor camps on the edge of Dubai, the dormitories on the periphery of Singapore, the subway system in New York that functions simultaneously as transit and as shelter, the commuter towns around Monaco, the temporary accommodation hotels tucked into the side streets of London boroughs that visitors never walk through. These are not accidents. They are the result of cities making deliberate choices about which people and which realities belong in the frame, and which ones need to be managed, contained, and kept beyond the edge of the photograph. Anti-homeless architecture is perhaps the most literal expression of this impulse, the metal spikes on flat surfaces, the curved benches designed to be impossible to lie down on, the removal of public seating in areas where unhoused people congregate. These design choices, which have been documented in luxury cities around the world, are not about public safety or urban aesthetics. They are about making visible poverty invisible, about physically encoding into the built environment the message that certain human beings do not belong in the frame of the city's self-image. The city spends money, real money, on designing discomfort because visible poverty threatens the brand, and the brand is worth billions. This is the hidden infrastructure of luxury cities. Not the towers and the transit systems and the five-star hotels, but the mechanisms by which the people and the realities that make those things possible are systematically moved out of sight. Understanding that infrastructure, seeing it clearly for what it is not a reason to hate these cities. It is a reason to understand them honestly, and honest understanding is the only foundation from which anything ever actually changes.